Good evening. I'm already showing my screen. That's not a good man. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay, and thank you for being patient with me as I try to do a few things. Hopefully, everybody can hear me, and if you can't, you'll tell me. But anyways, good to see everybody. I'm going to go ahead. We are joined today by Peter Saloom because today we're going to be talking about how to make adventures. Instead of just talking about that, we are going to be answering your questions. So thank you, Peter, for being patient on my problems here at home. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great. Yeah, we didn't.
All right, awesome.
And if you guys do hear any audio issues, I apologize. We didn't have a chance beforehand to kind of dive in and do some audio tests. So again, thank you so much for your patience. Anyways, like I said, I'm Goose. This is the Savage Goose Show, where we start by talking about the news for the week. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of start with that and kind of go over to my right slide here at this stage. First off, the newsletter. And I had the newsletter pulled up, and now I don't know what happened to it because that newsletter just always seems to want to escape me. But there was some cool stuff in the newsletter today, so I actually am going to share it.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Little secret, not really secret. I don't want to say not secret, but there's some cool stuff in there. Let's go ahead and get that correct one for that going. There we go. All right. So this week, first off, there is the ETU and Pine Box Middle School for Savage Worlds is on sale. The PDF versions are on sale on Drive-Thru RPG, and I believe is that it? I think it's just on Drive-Thru RPG. Basically, you get like everything ETU, everything Pine Box Middle School that you can imagine for a $135 price tag. This is all just for the PDF versions, though. This is this is not for if you want physical books. This is not the way to go. But if you're just interested in PDFs, this is going to get you everything, all 40 or over 40 unique products for East Texas University and Pine Box Middle School. ETU, I know they are working on a new version of ETU, or I think it's going to be like East Texas University New Blood is what the current working title is. So it's going to be like a new Suede product with a new updated rules for Suede, and then also a new plot point campaign. So look forward to that. The last week I announced that the Pathfinder, they announced and I announced with them, is that Pathfinder for Savage Worlds booster campaign was going to start today. It is not starting today. It is actually starting. It's actually starting June 4th, so 2 weeks from now. This is in order to not conflict with certain Kickstarters that are going on during these 2 weeks. I will talk about those when we get to the Kickstarter section, though. So wait, stop that. Oh wait, never mind. It's in the newsletter. I forgot about that. The reason it is not happening is because this Kickstarter for Savage World of Solomon Kane is coming back tomorrow. So it's starting tomorrow for 1 week. There's going to be a Kickstarter. There's going to be a whole bunch of minis and stuff in it. It looks beautiful. I don't have any more details on it though, but you will see that tomorrow when they launch the campaign. I can't remember what time it was. I want to say it was like, oh, here we go. Nope, that's just kind of a nope. No, that's not it. Sometime tomorrow. I think it's like 8 p.m. Paris time, which I think is like 2 p.m. Eastern time, I think. Or maybe it's or noon Eastern time. Around that time, yeah, we'll have the Savage World Solomon Kane Kickstarter starting, which means that this one will start in 2 weeks. Give you a little break to kind of make sure you have enough money for both of them. So spending it all at once. Make your way to the S5E Midnight City, or Midnight City for S5E is on Foundry. I'm not super familiar with this. This is the super heroic role playing for 5th edition. So not really. To be honest, I'm not sure what this has to do with Savage Worlds. I'm not sure what the connection is.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused by this.
Yeah, maybe it might be a was it Studio 2 publishing thing that I'm not aware of. So I'm not really sure what what these connections is Savage Worlds, but if you know about this and you're interested, go for it. More updates to Foundry for Savage Worlds. If you're using Foundry Virtual Tabletop, there's a whole bunch of updates here that you can see that they did with Metamorphic Digital Studios, who's their I believe is Pinnacle's partner for doing virtual tabletop stuff. So yeah. Licensee spotlight. Oh hey, look at this, the Iselion hybrid by Peter Saloom. That's crazy. That's so funny. Who would have known?
It's here.
It's here. It's on here. If you guys do not know about this, Peter Saloom, our great guest here, wrote this adventure. It's a sci-fi adventure. Without spoiling too much, it's a really fun. It has a nice, really cool mechanic. We talked a little bit about that mechanic in the last session. He also has Shadows of the Sacred Hills, which is also a really good adventure for like a Weird West setting. I don't know anything about the Stingers and Spores, though. Tell me more about Stingers and Spores.
So I did not write Stingers and Spores or create the setting. My good friend JC Thompson did, and you can check that out. It's available on Drive Thru RPG. But I did write an adventure for him and did a bunch of editing for that setting. That came out last year, I believe it kickstarted. Maybe it was the year before. Really successful Kickstarter. It is a wild concept where you can build sort of any insect-like adventurer and adventure in this world he's created, where you are a tiny bug and everything is big and scary and dangerous. So if you haven't checked it out, I strongly recommend you do.
Neat. No, that actually sounds pretty fun. I assume it's not. The question is there a Savage Worlds version of it? So.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. It is Savage Worlds. He is an Ace licensee under the moniker of Twitchy Butcher Studios. So that is that's all Savage Worlds friendly stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, well, give me 1 second then for me to go ahead and add this to my Drive Thru RPG wish list, because I did not.
There you go.
Get to that. Just so I remember to buy it later. Because it's that. I'll have to find the core rulebook too. But okay. But so that's your Ace licensee Iselion hybrid. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I assume Pierre's going to talk about it a little bit as we answer questions from the community. By the way, is the goal for today, is to answer questions that you guys have about designing adventures for Savage Worlds. So please, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments so that we can try to answer them to the best of our abilities. If we say something that you either disagree with or you think is really helpful or you want to elaborate on, leave a comment about it. Just want to hear from you guys. I'm hoping to see this to be a really engaging live stream. Then down the bottom, all we have here is just some updates on current crowdfunding. Production proofs are approved. Great. Unfortunately, I didn't get that product, so which I kind of regret. But I'm more waiting for these 4 things. So still waiting for the end of the month for this pledge manager to close, so I can finally get my hands on that sweet player's guide or player's book, whatever it's called. All right, and actually, I'm really waiting for this one because not only with the Night Train adventure, not only did I get the Night Train, I also got the Deadlands box set because I didn't have the Deadlands box set yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I now I'm like, hey, I'm only getting this adventure. I'm also getting the whole entire box set for Deadlands still. So I'm like,
it's a lot. It is dense.
Yeah, and I have to wait for it until the other books and all the other stuff sends too. It's like, okay, just gotta wait.
It's worth the wait.
There's a lot of stuff coming too. Like a lot of other things I need to go over as well. So I have time, but I'll be okay. I'll have other things to occupy my time with. All right. So what else do we have going on? Let's go ahead and share the screen and go back to our slideshow. All right. So the Secret Worlds Kickstarter is going on right now. It ends May 25th. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. By the way, anything that we're talking about should be listed in the notes down below. Like we mentioned, tomorrow, May 15th, the Savage Worlds Saloom and Kane is going to be launched. That's something to note about this is that, one, Shane Hensley, the creator of Savage Worlds and Deadlands, from my understanding, he did a lot of work. I don't know, but he did some work. Sounds like a lot of work on this, if not all the work on this. But it's being done by Monolith Games, not by Pinnacle. But Shane Hensley did have his hands in it. The book has everything you need to run Savage Worlds. You do not need to get the core rulebook if you just want to get Saloom and Kane and just run that world. So if you're interested in that, check that out. There's going to be a lot of other goodies based on the pictures we've seen, like miniatures and maps and stuff like that. I'm looking forward to seeing what's all in it. In fact, I'm thinking about maybe even doing like a special live stream just to talk about what's going to be in this campaign, because it'll be over basically next week, and I'm busy with another guest next week, and I don't want to go over it next week. So I don't want to like occupy their time to talk about not their campaign. All right. And like I said, not Tuesday, May 14th, not today, but 2 weeks from now, the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds Kickstarter for the Advanced Player's Guide and the Bestiary 2. I even said it right that time. The Bestiary 2. will be launching. That's a booster campaign. They're going to be doing it anyways, but it's an easy way to kind of get your pre-order in through the Kickstarter and just kind of help support Pinnacle. No, did I skip something? No. Okay. Vermilion Blood Hunt. That's a Kickstarter we know is coming. Just because they've said it's coming at least. Don't know when yet though. I haven't seen any updates from White Witch Games. I believe that's White Witch Games on when this is coming out. And then I haven't seen any updates from Arrakis on Shadow World's Vampires, which is going to be not a setting book, not any sort of like not setting, not an adventure, just kind of a guide to help you play vampires in Savage Worlds. It seems like in like a modern day Savage Worlds, but we'll see when the Jumpstart comes out. All right. On to our main topic. If you're just joining us, you've missed a lot. Mostly some technical issues on my side of the work. But today we are answering your questions about Savage Worlds adventure design, and we are joined by Peter Saloom of Pear Tree Studios to talk about his experience in writing adventures, what he's done in using his adventures. We did talk last week about adventure design, and so today we are answering your questions about adventure design. So if you have any questions, even if you are worried that we may have mentioned them last week, or if you want to have some follow-ups last week, please just leave a comment. Let us know what your questions are, and we'll be happy to answer them. So let me go and take a look at the chat and see kind of what questions we already have besides the comments on life problems. Let's see here.
Yeah, I can't give general life problem advice. I'm not qualified.
I don't know. You have that. You're a hard worker, so there might be some entrepreneurial advice you can give me. All right. So Hamster Doom asked for both of you: is it difficult being a total smoke show? I'm not sure what that means exactly. So maybe you have to elaborate for me, Peter, if you know what that means. Do people not take your game seriously because of your charisma?
Yes. So whoever that is that said that is just referring to basically our stunning good looks.
Okay.
And how, how distracting. I mean, I probably speak for both of us, how distracting that can be at a game table for all the other parties involved. Yes, it's a constant problem. I struggle through it. Sometimes I wear a mask, things like that. But there's only so much you can do.
No, I play with, and I don't tend to have that issue because I play with my wife, so she's just kind of used to it at this point. And then my two of my best friends, one from college, one from high school. So they're both used to it. And my brother-in-law, who's just actually, no, never mind. Of those four people I said, I think my brother-in-law is the one that says the most about my looks. So maybe he is distracted.
Strange. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, he's just one of those. He's just being silly. That's all it is. All right. So that being said, let's go ahead and remove that comment. Get into something a little more serious. Hamster, that's what I was going through here.
I will say this. Just to connect that to something that is based in reality.
Sure.
There is a big difference between what you're describing, which is your everyday play group of people that you're very close with, family members and long-term friends and things like that, and running in convention settings where very frequently you've never met anybody at your table until about 5 minutes prior to this, this game starting. And I would say it is helpful for a GM in that situation to be someone who is flexible and socially, understanding and easy to deal with when you're trying to start to run a game kind of from start to finish with people who you've never met. You don't know their personalities or their, tendencies yet. So just to connect that to something in the real world, there is some advice to be gained there, which is be open-minded, listen more than you talk, and kind of pay attention, read the room, I think is the phrase. So
right. Cool. So this is from Hamster Doom as well, the Hamster of Doom, and this is more for you when you write your adventures and as a published document. And the question is just, do you write in layout right away, or do you start somewhere else?
Oh, okay. I don't write in layout at all because I don't do my own layout. So
you got an excellent layout person to do it for you.
Yep, that's not my talent. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not, visually gifted or anything like that. I'm extremely fortunate that on both of the products that I've published so far and plans for future projects. I've had Carl Kiesler do layout and interior graphic design and some cover work in the case of Shadows of the Sacred Hills. Oh no, in the case of both of them, I'm sorry, Carl, you did both of those. So I write my personal is I just use Google Docs because it's a live document and I can use it on any of my machines. And I also share with editors and my brain trust of feedback people. So that's, useful for me. I think if you asked 10 different people, you might get 10 different answers on that, including, pen and paper and stuff like that. But for me, that's the easiest way to draft. And I think it would be distracting from just the pure writing process if you were also doing it in InDesign, for example, because then you're now thinking about what does that paragraph look like on the page and what picture fits next to it and things like that. And that would kind of carry me away from my focus on, the narrative and making sure the structure of everything is correct. But if you do it that way and it works, cool.
Yeah, I think I saw something about how. Oh, who was it? Oh, actually, it was Carl. Carl was talking on his update for Sidewinder that him and Chris, I want to say Chris. They're like, yeah. Now that he got the document from Chris first, Carl put it into layout, and then as Chris is writing more, Chris is now just writing in layout, and they're basically like handing things back and forth between each other. So I think it's even sounds like they started not in layout. Then once Carl kind of put the initial few pages in layout, they wrote from there. That's just based on my reading of today's update from Sidewinder Recoiled, their Kickstarter that they did a while back.
Yeah, and somebody who's gifted with, in the software, it might be that he's getting two jobs done at once there, and there's great efficiency in that. For somebody like me, I think it would just be a train wreck.
All right. So next question is from Capslash. What is your approach for setting expectations for the players? Do you include rules, guidelines for character creation? I know yours is going to be different because you're always usually bringing characters to the game.
Yeah.
So you can at least maybe you can at least start with the setting expectations part of things there.
Yeah, I see these as two questions, kind of separate but very important, right? And setting expectations for your players, regardless of the game format, whether it's your home game, long-running campaign, one shot at a convention, whatever, setting expectations up front is critical to a successful game. The way that begins for me is in the blurb or the advertisement for the game slot at whatever convention I'm attending. 90% of the time that takes place on tabletop.events, which is the website where people register for events for conventions mostly. I know there are others. And so in those descriptions, I make sure that I'm setting the expectations of what's going to happen in that time slot, as well as trying to entice people to be interested in signing up to play. But I'm also making sure that people understand the type of game I run. So for example, with Shadows of the Sacred Hills, I may type something into that initial blurb that says, this is a role play and investigation heavy style of game, and has moments of combat, but not extreme tactical combat. And the reason I throw all that kind of messy lingo in there is because I want it to be very clear to the player who's looking for a game they like, to be able to discern, is that the game for me or not? Because maybe the really crunchy, all the minis out on the grid, with the tape measure guy might be like, oh, that one might not be for me, and it saves people a lot of time. And I don't want anybody to sign up for my game thinking they're getting something and then be disappointed either. So setting those expectations up front is critical to success, because then when people sit down, they're like, I know what I'm getting into. I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
The other part of this about rules and guidelines for character creation, I guess I'm a little less qualified to answer this, but I've run plenty of stuff like this.
Right.
For example, I've run Deadlands a bunch of times, and I'm actually getting ready to, this Thursday, I'll be running, starting up a Horror at Headstone Hill run through at a local monthly game meetup we have here. And so I tend to let people, I would say, yeah, you got to make a character that fits within, the Deadlands and the Savage Worlds rule set here, and it's got to be ranked seasoned. But other than that, I tend to give them pretty free range. I will offer advice if I think somebody's going down a road where it is likely their character is going to be like, their agency is going to be taken away by just the contents of the narrative, and it may make them feel shortchanged. So I would give advice like, you can absolutely play that character, but understand that as soon as you're seen in the town of Heaston Hill, as that character, people are going to get the pitchforks out and chase you out of town, and that's okay, and we can do that. But is that the experience that you want? And
right. Do you want to be hated? Do you want to have to basically like?
Yeah,
and some players would love that challenge. They love the challenge of like they have to like try to continue to be an adventurer or doing whatever they need with, but they have to find another way to do it because people hate them particular, major outsider hindrances essentially.
Yeah. I mean, harrowed, things like that, where it's like you don't just get to kind of cruise around and be your average Joe. There are some real problems with being who you are in the setting.
Yeah.
If the answer is yeah, I know that, and I think it's going to be extremely challenging, and it's going to put wrinkles in all sorts of stuff, and it's going to be fun. Cool. Okay, you're aware, and now the expectations have been set. Just like, to go back to the first question, a lot of times people go like, "Oh, I didn't know that. I thought that that was just fine, and everybody knew about that in the setting, or whatever." And then they pick something else, and things are a little smoother for them. So
right, yeah. It's basically just kind of like double checking your players' work to make sure that they are aware of the consequences of their other decisions in the game, which is good. I'll say for me, I think for me, like to answer that question, it all depends. There's several things that depends on like how much detail I'm giving them. For instance, if I'm running a pre-written campaign, I'm going to tell them kind of the premise of that campaign, which is what I tend to do. I tend to do pre-written campaigns. I tell them about, okay, here, like for instance, I'm running Rise of the Rune Lords right now. Tell my players, hey, you guys are going to be spending a majority of your time in this town of Sandpoint. You're going to have to make sure that you're anchored for some reason somehow in this town, as far as continuing to, because you're going to want to keep. You're gonna be staying here. You're gonna be spending a lot of time here. And then also keep in mind, hey, this is Savage Pathfinder. Don't make sure you're paying attention to the rules differences between Savage Pathfinder and the Savage Worlds core rule books and stuff like that. And then if we're just going with a setting and not a pre-written camp adventure, I'm gonna say, okay, this setting has these qualities. So if we're doing Rippers, we'll say, okay, for Rippers, remember this is a Victorian era horror game. Even though it is Victorian era horror, you can't just run around with your weapons out all the time. That's going to cause problems for you. I'd also list out any setting rules that the setting has that's specific to that setting, just so that they know, hey, like, because sometimes, building characters can definitely change if you have certain setting rules in place. If we are doing the unarmored, if you're being born a hero, that's going to change how you build your character. If you're running the unarmored hero setting rule, that's going to change how you build your character.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you just got to make sure your players are clear on the setting rules are, and if you can tell them like what the setting is and what get a basic premise of it, and also when it comes to like most settings, there's an option for them to kind of read up in the setting itself. Now, when it comes to making up your own games where you're not relying on things, it becomes even more essential that you describe, one, what is the game? What's the premise of the game or the campaign? What's the premise of the campaign? What's the premise of the world? Because usually most of our worlds that we create have some sort of premise, right? There's a game I want to play, I want to run some point where everybody essentially has the gifted arcane background. And it's all about like the unique thing for this world I'm going to build is that all of the trappings for all of your powers is the same trappings. It may look a little bit different, but like, if you have an ice trapping, everything you have is ice. You can't ever do fire. You can't ever do anything else. If you have, maybe your trapping is like you have a chain, something like that. So there's basically kind of make sure that you have a description of what is unique about your world, what the setting rules you're going to use, and then also what the campaign adventure itself is what you have in mind for the adventure. Now, some of that maybe because in the same setting, you can have two completely different ventures that are going to require different skill sets, different party dynamics and such. Is this a heist game? Is this a dungeon delve? Is this a political intrigue game? Is this more investigation? One of the settings that one of the Savage Worlds products I've really enjoyed reading through is the City Guard Chronicles, which takes place in a unnamed unnamed big city. It could be any big city, Neverwinter. It could be Baldur's Gate. It could be, I think, some non-Forgotten Realms cities.
Unnamed
Sharn.
fantasy city.
Yeah. And that game, though, requires the characters to know a lot more about investigation skills and persuasion skills than necessarily may about fighting skills, or not as much. There's more a focus on the investigation side of things, so you have to make sure your characters have that investigation quality. So that's kind of things that you kind of need to be sure of when talking about that. And then also, and for all of them, is making sure that everybody is on the same side. Like everyone knows what everyone's making, generally speaking, so that you can create a cohesive party. Or maybe they want to have characters that are connected to each other before the game even starts. So, I think
this is why session 0. Sorry to interrupt you. Is so important. Is all of these things that you mentioned, all the things I mentioned, all that can come out in a session 0 very quickly. In this, I'm getting ready to run this Deadlands game. We had a session 0 last month, I think it was, and we got around the table, and 3 of my players all came and said, "Yep, we want to play Hucksters." And I said, "Okay, so are you sure that you want a group of, a posse of 4, and 3 of you are crazy dealing with the devil magic slinger people?" And they kind of looked around and they were like, "No, that's not what we want." And they planned amongst themselves and came up with a different sort of arrangement. And I don't think anybody felt like they didn't get what they want. I think they felt like they improved the situation overall. Session 0 is where you can set these expectations, give the information you need about the setting rules, about the campaign, about how these characters are going to be made. If you're running, if I'm running a historical fiction World War I set game and you're all British soldiers, then, I guess my rule is like, you have to make a British soldier. I mean, there's a whole big variety of things you can do with edges and hindrances and things like that to be extremely, unique within that framework, but you're all going to be some member of some British soldier, right? So, I don't think of that as taking too much control or taking too much agency away from your players, because you're saying, hey, this is the framework of the game. Do you want to participate in this game? If you don't, that's fine. It's not for you. That's fine.
Yeah. Amsterdam, he says, the Sea Guard Chronicles is totally set in Ankh-Morpork, which I could totally.
I don't know what Ankh-Morpork is.
Oh, it's from Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I think it's Discworld.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's the major city where a lot of those books take place.
Okay, so I do know what it is, but it's been a long time. Okay.
Yeah. But the tyrant who's not, and I can absolutely see that. Going back down the list of her questions, what advice would you give for coming over from other game systems? I think the answer to this question is going to depend on the game system that you're coming from.
Yep. So most commonly, I think people would say from Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And I've been asked that question, and you see that question pop up constantly on
Reddit,
all the channels, all the platforms, Facebook, Discord, wherever. A lot of people saying, it's usually a GM saying, I have a long-standing Dungeons and Dragon group, but I want them to try Savage Worlds. How do I get them to do it? I mean, there's not just one answer for this. The first thing would be know your group and talk to them and see if they want to do it, I guess. But ultimately, my strong recommendation is don't bring them into a fantasy adventure in Savage Worlds right away, because I believe it's sort of unfair to them to have a long history in Dungeons and Dragons and their knowledge of the setting and the genre, and then have to kind of flip the rules portion and the mechanics portion of their brain within the same genre. It's very hard for people to just say, oh, this is good. Many people's reaction is, you messed up my D&D. and made it confusing for me. And I was comfortable with D&D, so it's hard for me to see whether this is good or has value, whether it does
Yeah.
or doesn't, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people tend to, when they do that, when they do go from like D&D to Savage Worlds for fantasy, they you end up seeing people trying to change the rules to make it more like D&D. It's like,
Bring
well, if
it
you
back.
want to,
Yeah, give it
yeah,
back to me. Yep.
yeah. So they want HP back. They don't want wounds. They want HP. Basically, a lot of times it's the attrition system. They're like, oh, we like the dice mechanics, but we don't like the lack of attrition system in Savage Worlds, especially for around HP.
Yeah. And
That's
and I have been working with a friend of mine who is a very long-term D&D expert GM. He is really into making a Savage Worlds fantasy setting that um, actually showcases the mechanical and also role play sort of differences between Savage Worlds and D&D. And he wants to do he's doing it just from a pure interest standpoint. And so he's creating a fantasy adventure where the mechanics used and the situations that are involved in are so cinematic and so keyed in on very unique Savage Worlds mechanics
mhm.
that it really cannot be seen as D&D with
Right.
different die rolls. And so I'm interested. He's just starting to play test that now, like this week, and I'm interested to see where that goes because it's a challenge to do that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I think the right person with a lot of D&D knowledge would be able to do that.
Yeah. So there's one adventure that comes to mind when it comes to trying to do like a fantasy-esque thing that kind of helps with that, because it only has one combat at the very end of the adventure. That's why it comes to mind. And it's called Sins of the Fathers. It was the jumpstart adventure for Deadlands Dark Ages.
Okay.
Uh, uh, and just because I remember I ran through that adventure, and we did use a lot of the rules, other rules for D&D, for Savage Worlds rather, that you don't really see similar things in D&D. Like there was a social encounter, a social conflict, a lot more investigation, because it is a more of a, like, hey, let's figure out what happened here type situation. But I think generally your advice about saying, hey, do like a one shot outside of Savage Worlds, or sorry, outside of fantasy, using Savage Worlds is probably the best advice there. It's just like, I wouldn't say like do a whole entire, like, I don't think you need to do a whole entire campaign, but
Yeah, and I would say do something that really is a palate cleanser for your group too. Do something that's
yeah,
wild. Do Aliens versus Rednecks, do Trailer Park Shark Attack. Do
ooh,
something that just totally cannot be identified as anything that draws any parallels to D&D whatsoever, and just
I
see what people say about the rules of the game.
right.
Were these rules fun? You
I'm not
know,
I'm not sure if I want to send people as Trailer Park Shark Attack right away though. That might
you're
be a
right.
bit. That might not be the good starting point.
Hey,
Uh,
sink or
I,
swim, right?
and literally, yes. Although then just swim again and sink again and swim again. But yeah, I think some sort of like, even some sort of like sci-fi, like the Isilian hybrid, might be a good starting adventure for
I
us.
would strongly recommend the Iselion hybrid. I think John Doom in the chat is suggesting his adventure Seventh Kind, which I also recently gotten. So that would be a good one for people to try as well.
Okay, well, I will have to exactly run something kind. Okay, well, let's kind of go down to the next question here. Hopefully, if you did not answer your question, if you feel like if we missed it, sorry, and then if you feel like we didn't answer it well enough, just let us know, and we'll try to readdress that. Um,
We'll try,
uh,
we'll try to guess again.
we'll try to guess. Yeah, we'll try to figure it out again. I will say though, if you're coming over, let's just actually let's talk about that question a little bit further though. Let's say they're not coming over from a fantasy game.
Yeah.
Um, I think that coming over from D&D and like D&D S games is definitely the hardest.
And most common.
Yeah, and most common. But I'm also thinking, like, if you're coming over from, like, say, Call of Cthulhu, right?
Yeah.
Where you are doing more investigation and you're doing a lot more sanity stuff. I think that one's actually a little bit mostly because I don't think it's been answered nearly as often as like the D&D question has. But the question is, okay, what if we're coming from that one? What do you want to do there? Obviously, I think we'd say, hey, start with the horror companion, because the horror companion is going to have a lot of the kind of details for how to run stress, how to run phobias. Has some a small bestiary that I believe includes some like elder things type stuff going on there.
Yeah, there's Lovecraftian influence and stuff in there.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I think that games that aren't as combat centered, like Call of Cthulhu has combat, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's as centered around combat, at least based on my experience. And I think those games are actually would be a little bit easier to kind of pick up because all you tend to be doing is kind of changing your the mechanics, but the role play tends to be very similar. That's my thoughts right now. As I'm trying to like think about this off the top of my head, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what.
Call of Cthulhu, I actually think probably is easier to come into Savage Worlds from, because
Right, right,
the conceit of just total lethality, in Call of Cthulhu, from my understanding of it, is, transfers well to the swinginess and high lethality of certain
and
Savage Worlds games as well.
this is the
Your
pulpiness.
players are going to be more likely to understand, like, yeah, and the pulpiness, bad things are going to happen to our group here, and not all of us or none of us are going to get through this, and so that attitude is, I just think is more conducive to coming over.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. I do think that like the fantasy settings, the fantasy ones are going to be probably the hardest to come over from, just because you're going from such an attrition based system, and where the attrition is so tied into the mechanics of not just combat, but to a lot of other things as well. And I think, yeah, I'll just leave it there. So I think going on from that, let's go ahead and go on to, if you have anything else, let's go on to the next question, which is from Todd DeWhite. What edges are at the top of your list for creating adversaries?
Oh boy.
I think it's a good question. I like that question a lot.
Yeah, it is. I'm not prepared for it, because I've used so many. Some of the ones that I have found the most interesting, I don't know if they're necessarily my favorite, because it all depends on who I'm creating, are the ones that aren't your typical combat edges, which I feel is what is sort of expected from a sort of box standard bad guy, I guess, is that they're just going to have the most sort of basic combat stuff to use against you. But when you get into leadership edges with wild card NPCs, you start to get things that are really interesting that your characters get. Your players get a little flustered with, when all of a sudden, the big bad has a common bond instead of their support character having it, and now things are getting passed around, or their tests aren't working as well. Things like that. That can be like a real confusing point of time for your players before they kind of figure out what's going on. So those are fun to do, but it really depends on the setting, because sometimes you're just making some horrific, combat related monster that's got a million attacks and a long reach or things like that. But yeah, I guess if I had to say my favorite, I would just say, and maybe this is dodging the question, I'd say not the edges they expect.
I'm going to be on the flip side here, because right now, I guess, and this is mostly because my players are very combat focused, as much as I would like to be more investigative. My players tend to be a little more combat focused. So when I think about writing characters, I do tend to think a lot more about combat. And usually I am thinking about, like right now, I'm writing trying to create a NPC that's going to be adversarial to my characters. Not necessarily like outright, like, hey, you're just going to fight this person right away, because that you can't, because that'd be illegal, and they're in a town, and that's wrong. They might be evil, but they haven't done anything wrong. Nevertheless, I am looking at giving that character. I like to give characters trademark weapon, one. That's one of my favorite one of my favorite edges to give people, because I like the idea of like they have this weapon and that weapon is special to them, and they are particularly, that's like iconic to this to this person. So you always see them, because it helps me also describe the character themselves. You see this character who's wielding a certain weapon on their back. You can describe that weapon in greater detail. It kind of adds to the ambiance of the character themselves. So I like trademark weapon a lot.
Yeah, I love
that. Frenzy, I tend to see as a pretty common one to give to characters, just because it gets them extra attacks. That, and I also tend to see a lot of first strike is when it comes to combat edges. I tend to see those ones a lot when I look at combat focused, melee combat focused characters. And I think that does tend to, you have to kind of again keep in mind when we're talking about what's the setting we're talking about. Like if you're in a setting with guns like Deadlands, you're probably not going to be doing as much melee, and so it's going to change what edges you're going to give your NPCs. If you're in a place where there's a lot of magic, it's going to change which edges you give them, because you're going to see more magic edges, more powers edges, I guess what they should say, than other settings. So it really just does depend on what you're going for. I know it's not the most helpful list, but it's something that kind of the starting point there.
The other thing I would say that is connected to that point is I have found there's no better way to teach your players the benefit of really utilizing their edges, or even just the standard combat option rules that are available to them per the rules of Savage Worlds, than by using those things against them.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they're like, a lot of times the reaction is like, wait, how did that opponent get away with doing that? Oh, that was a test. They did a test and it worked like this.
It's always tests.
It's
always tests.
Can I do that? Of course you can do that. You can do that, or oh, it's because he had this edge. Oh, I didn't know that edge worked like that. And now they're thinking about, is that coming up in an advance, or even just for another character in the future or something like that. The best way to learn is to get beat by it, a couple of times, and then, start to understand the value of it.
On the flip side of that, don't limit yourself to just the edges, though. Because there's a whole entire section in most of the books about monster abilities. And there's so even if you're creating a NPC who is a humanoid or playable race, don't feel like you have to limit yourself just to the edges. You can give them other abilities that are from the monster sections. My players just fought against a cleric of Lamashtu in their Pathfinder game, and she had some sort of two certain abilities that I don't believe are available as edges, because one of them was like part of Lamashtu herself, where it was like some sort of like when she basically kind of giving a bonus to the attack rolls and damage rolls that were pretty strong, and that's not an edge that's available. It's just a some sort of monster ability that someone created. I don't think it's available as a monster ability like in the books anywhere. It's just something someone created for this character. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to certain abilities that are already written down. Don't let yourself to edges. Don't let yourself to abilities in the books. Feel free to create your own abilities that you think are cool. It's going to provide a challenge, and it's not going to slow down the game. I think that's also going to be important. Like, you don't really want to create things that are going to overcomplicate combat and that you're going to forget.
Yeah, and nothing causes more chaos early in a combat or an encounter than fear. So, monsters or NPCs that somehow cause fear is just an excellent way to create chaos at the table and drive up the tension.
If my players would actually fail their spirit rolls, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes parties are great at getting past that, but sometimes they got to use 2-3 bennies to get past it too, and it changes things down the road for you as well.
Yep. All right. So next question, also from Todd DeWitt. What tips would you give for higher advancement encounters? Is like heroic and legendary. I think this is a good question as well, because we don't want to. I was listening to a some sort of podcast or YouTube video either today or yesterday. I was talking about how, like, and this is for D&D, how a lot of times what GMs want to do to make a combat stronger is just increase increase HP, just increase the hit points. And what really they should be doing is increasing damage output. Because all you're doing by increasing HP is slowing down the encounter, you're making that take longer. And I think one of the things that's coming in my mind is that when it comes to heroic and legendary, is instead of focusing on like preventing wounds from happening, instead of worrying about increasing toughness to ridiculous levels, and parry to ridiculous levels, is somehow increasing the threat level of that PC or the NPC, to the PCs. You know, making it so somehow that they can cause more damage and get past. If you're doing heroic and legendary, it's possible that your PC's parry and toughness is like really high, and so you just really need to work on doing something to kind of make sure that the damage output of whatever character you're doing is actually going to hit. It's going to cause a challenge.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's, I think the question goes at how do you keep it challenging without dragging it out? You want to keep things fast, furious, fun, as they say. Mm-hmm. What I would say is if you're running a game where everybody is heroic, legendary, kind of sort of getting towards God tier kind of characters, I would say, first of all, don't run any combat encounters that aren't major set piece type of things.
Yes.
Like don't have them have to bump into a random encounter with a bear in the woods, things like that. That is not fast, furious fun. Those are sort of just like speed bumps on the way, unless there's some critical plot reason that needs to occur. The other thing I would say is, although, yes, the opponents should be very strong in these cases, introduce other factors that make the combats interesting for a variety of reasons. So, yeah, the opponent should be stronger, should be able to have, some lethality towards them, but introduce environmental issues. Like all of a sudden this combat is in the middle of an electrical storm or something like that, and that plays some sort of advantage or disadvantage to some side of the party, or the terrain is such that there is extreme hazard that needs to be navigated each round. Things like that tend to make it so that maybe under no modifiers and sort of standard combat rounds, your players might have some big advantage because there are a group of them. It starts to even the playing field and make more random things start to happen. I like to use all sorts of external things happening in my set piece combats that don't necessarily have to do with the bad guy attacking the good guy and etc. Right. It's like the bad guy's attacking the good guy and then a stampede of buffalo come through, or something, and that has to be dealt with, and that helps make things interesting. Also, at those levels, you can have all sorts of legendary sort of items, relics, things like that play different, have different interplay. Be creative with that, and can influence the balance of difficulty for encounters. So don't make it just I make the bad guy harder and that's all that I do. Work it from a whole bunch of factors.
Yeah, so going on with that, incorporating dramatic tasks into your combat is a great way to go to. Just not necessarily to make it harder, but just make it more interesting.
Yeah, and darkness is one that's overlooked all the time. It's such an obvious one. It's everybody's great at fighting if they're a legendary fighter, but when all the lights go out, it gets really hard to be a legendary fighter, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, we have -6 to all your rolls.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right, let's see here. So next question
from Josh. A motorcycle rally outside my house right now.
No, I hear that. Yeah.
I apologize.
Josh Hughes asks, did you read a lot of products before beginning to make your own?
Me? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So many, like years and years of them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I would suggest, anybody who's interested in writing, or any writer will tell you the best way to get better at writing is to read a lot. I've read million PDFs and lots of rule books, not just Savage World stuff, but just, from all over the place. But also I just read a lot, that has absolutely nothing to do with TTRPGs. Like I just read a
Yeah.
lot of books.
Do you do a lot of
And
audiobooks? I know you drive a lot. Do you do a lot of audiobooks in your drives?
I do more audiobooks now than print books because just of my lifestyle of travel and working outside and things like that. But I'll, in a given day, I'll listen to, 6 to 8 hours of audiobooks, every day. So you're always getting little ideas, and that's where the inspirations come from, is some weird piece of one book somewhere, and then my mind goes off sort of in a tangent, on that, and so yeah, and you learn about how people. A big thing is you learn about how people structure things. When you read a lot of adventures and rule books, you see how they structure an adventure from start to finish. How is it built? And that's a whole separate conversation. We talked about it a little bit actually last week, and you have to get that under your belt to be able, on the publication end of things anyway, to be able to kind of make a clean product. But you really have to get it under your belt just as a good GM to be able to get your players to the important beat points of that great idea you had.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, so the answer to the question was, yeah, I read
you're right. Read a lot, and don't, not just Savage stuff. Read everything else too.
No, yeah, I mean, this is all graphic novels. I read graphic novels all the time. They're so much fun, full of ideas, and totally related to Savage Worlds.
Yeah, and even like other game systems have things that they can offer to your game in Savage Worlds. I've seen some really cool ideas that in other game system books that really don't have to be in that game system. It could be in any game system you wanted. The person who wrote that game system just happened to have another good idea for something that's, associated with something else.
Yeah,
so
just keep reading. Yeah.
So even though we love Savage Worlds here, we're saying what I'm trying to say is don't feel like you can only read Savage Worlds stuff. Like,
not at all.
Enjoy other games too. Just remember your true love. That's all. Tyler Chowders asks, best way to get over writer's block, which I think is like a question not just for Savage Worlds adventure writers, but kind of just for everybody. But
yeah,
specifically for Savage Worlds.
For me, I would say it's write the bad thing that you don't want to write, because typically writer's block is not I cannot write a single word. Typically, at least for me, but I think for others it is I don't think I'm really writing anything worth writing. It doesn't seem good, so I won't do anything. So my advice would be just write a page of the bad stuff. Just write it all out. Even write like, and I think this is bad. Go ahead, write it all out. Because what's going to happen is your brain is going to get into the writing mode, and you're going to write a page of garbage. And in there's going to be one sentence where you say, "Oh, that's not bad," and that reminded me, that I'm kind of going this direction, and you'll grab it. The delete key is a very powerful thing, guys. So, you write all that garbage and you get to just throw it away, and you don't even have to tell anybody you ever wrote it. Nobody will make fun of you. Writing is work. I look at writing just like I look at my other jobs. I don't want to say that to say that it's not enjoyable. My other jobs are also enjoyable. But, you actually have to get up in the morning and write. And sometimes, you go to work and the day is tough and you slog through it, but it's a process. And from that, you find the pieces that work. And not every day is that sort of alpha state feeling of like, wow, all my ideas are just flowing out of me right now, and it all makes sense and it's going so smoothly. That's, in my experience, that's maybe 5% of the time or something like that. And the rest is just trying to make it make sense, puke it all out, and then you're going to go back over it 3 and 5 and 10 times maybe before you really get it to where it sounds like your voice and it's really something great. But it will get there. Yeah. So just write the bad stuff down.
Yeah, and so going along with that, I heard some good advice a while ago. I tried implementing. I need to kind of try implementing again. Is try to just write. If you're just try to write down as a general habit, even if you find something to start writing on, right, to start writing about. Write down 10 ideas a day, bad or good. Just write down 10 ideas a day. Whatever the thing is that you're working on, whether it be adventures. Like for me, it's usually like Savage Worlds or video ideas. Just write down 10 ideas a day, good or bad, doesn't matter. I had some really bad ideas I wrote down, but it gets your brain into the process of thinking of ideas. And eventually maybe you'll write one down that is bad, but maybe you think of an offshoot idea that's actually a good idea that's like very similar to your bad idea. So just get in the practice of writing stuff down, writing your ideas down, even if they're bad, even if you don't think they're sounding good. And that's a tough hurdle to cross, because even like in the first, I remember the first day I tried doing that, I was like, this is like a stupid idea. Like this is like I just came with it because I thought it was just an idea. Like no, I wrote it down because
Yeah.
I think it was like,
Oh yeah.
I think I wrote. I don't know. I think my wife and I were talking about Blue's Clues, and so I wrote down Blue's Clues and Savage Worlds because it's an idea. It's not a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea, but it's an idea. Actually, now that I think about it more, I'm like, maybe that would be a bad like children's game for like an investigation type deal, but not what I want to write about right now. But it was an idea.
Yeah. And getting 10 bad ideas out of the way is great, because your 10 bad ideas closer to the next good idea. I manage a group of salespeople in my other life, and I tell them all the time to try to get 20 refusals as fast as they can. And they look at me like I'm nuts. And I say, just pick up the phone and get people to say no, and they don't want to buy your stuff. Get 20 of them to say it.
Worst happens,
because you're 20 out of the way, and the next one's going to be a great one. Yeah. And it's a mentality. You just push through it. It all has to do with fear. The writer's block stuff has to do with fear. I'm going to write the bad thing, and somehow there's going to be a consequence. It will make me a bad writer. I feel the same way. That's why I understand it, but just keep going.
Yep. All right. So let me go ahead and hide this. Let's go on to the next questions. And Tyler actually responded later in the chat saying, for me, I have to get to the point where I just have to admit that there's a lot of mistakes in what you do. Plow forward, keep the pace. Yep, that's basically. I think that's basically what we said, right?
Yeah. That's production writing is what he's talking about. Production writing, and that's a good attitude to have. And if you have a good editor, you're fine.
Hamster Doom says, when do you dump an idea if you don't think it's coming together as a good adventure premise? Like, what point do you just say, I give up, this isn't worth my time?
So I try not to get that far down the road writing an adventure and then find out that, because I don't want to do the work and then can it. But what I would say is I don't think I ever really dumped the idea completely. I have this long Google Doc of just premises, and I just add to it whenever I think of them. And a ton of them are bad and will never see anything even close to a game. And then some of them I know are like, I love the idea, I'd love to develop it. Maybe I'll have time to, maybe I won't. And out of that, just a small number actually becomes something that really gets to like being written and play tested. But I never really throw them away. I've been writing this Terminator, this game set in the Terminator universe just for fun for like 3 years now, and it's horrible, and it just continues to be horrible. But for some reason, I keep going back to it and saying like, I really want to make it work, and like messing around with it and stuff like that. And it just stays on the hard drive, But what I would say is, I think what Hamster of Doom wants to know is, when should I know to quit? If you get enough just quick bullet points of the start, the beginning, and the end, especially the end of this adventure, and you think that would be really fun, and you can get it enough roughed out to get it to a play test, just a bare bones play test with a group of players, I think at that point you're going to know whether you should move forward or not. Because bad adventures don't really survive play test at all. And for me anyways, I can tell by the feedback I get and the engagement I get from players. But it's a judgment call for everybody. I think if you're confident in something, and also if you feel passionately about it, you can probably get almost any premise to a point where it's interesting enough to become a real idea. But I don't linger on stuff. I go through ideas, and if I think it's a winner, I start, and I write kind of very cautiously and minimally at first, and fast and messy, and then I get to play test, and I see how it goes from there. And if it's terrible, I don't ever have to do anything, more than that. I hope that made sense.
I think so. I think it made sense. So next question from Ben Giles. He has 2 questions that are kind of related, and are related to that idea of playtesting. So first question is, how long do you feel you need to quote cook a typical adventure in playtesting before it's ready for publishing? And the second question to follow that is, and do you always playtest the adventure yourself?
So first question is, the more the better. I would say, any adventure that I'm going to publish, I would, once I had it where I thought it was very close to completely written, I would want to be playtesting it at least 3 con sessions. So like 3 one shots with preferably all with different players, because that's really helpful, is a variety of players. Doing it more than that certainly wouldn't hurt. 6 times, 12 times, wouldn't hurt. But that could take somebody a year and a half or 2 years, depending on kind of their play schedule and things like that. But I would say, minimum 3 times, so that you can see some different extrapolations of what's going on, and with as many players as you can get in, different players, and try, solicit feedback. It's very hard to solicit feedback from players. It's very hard for people to give you criticism to your face after they played through a game that you obviously worked hard on, because most people are nice and don't want to do that. But try to anyway. And and then at that point you'll know what things need to be modified. What I find are, sometimes I put points into adventures that I think are riveting and going to really engage players, and after 3 or 4 playtests, nobody has ever even engaged with that point at all, and so it doesn't need to be written in there anymore. It's just something I like, but it doesn't serve any purpose, in the adventure. Playtesting is incredibly valuable. So the more the better. I would strongly recommend not publishing anything that wasn't at least minimally play tested, because then I think you're just really sort of offering an outline instead. That might be something maybe more for like a one sheet. I'm not sure. I don't really do those.
I do like one sheets a lot. I'll say that. So if you are getting one sheets,
and I presume some one sheets are play tested. I don't know. I just know they come out so frequently that it must be hard to play test them all.
Okay, let's see here. And so the question was, you answer this question, do you always play test yourself? Its answer seems to be yes.
Does that question mean, do I run the game as a playtest, or does that mean, do I play in the adventure I wrote?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, either way, I never play in them, the ones that I write, because I can't get anybody else to run them.
You also know all of them. You tend to write ones with the mystery involved, and you already know the mystery because you wrote it. So
sure. So I would have to definitely compartmentalize quite a bit. But yes, I always run them as playtests first. I think that's fundamental.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all the questions I am seeing in the chat. I'm going to move into some questions we had over on the Reddit. If you guys have any more questions that you want to ask in chat, go ahead and leave them there. Awesome. But the question from I had on Reddit from when I posted this earlier is, how do you decide on the level of detail and how many options that you want to flesh out ahead of game time? So I don't think this is necessarily about like writing a published adventure. I think we're just talking about like, an average, more of an average Joe GM. How do you decide on the level of detail and how many options to flesh out ahead of game time?
I'm assuming game time is just like a session, like a game.
Yeah. Like Thursday, like my games are Thursdays at 6. How much detail do I flesh out ahead of time for that?
The more you know your players, the better you're going to be at that, I think, because it probably varies. But I would say, like, rule of thumb for me would be, there could be sort of like 3 key interactions or scenes, during game time. I would think they might be a discovery, a confrontation, a particularly difficult task, or something like that, but not more than that. The other thing I would say is, just always, whatever you think you are bringing to the table, remember your players are bringing some percentage more than that to the table for the session. So whatever you bring, there's going to be more than that going on at the table. So Don't get disappointed if you don't get to all of your stuff, but certainly you don't need to. And I hope I'm answering this question the way this person needs it to be answered, but
right.
certainly you don't need to write out, every extrapolation of every
possible decision,
permutation of where these folks are going to go. There's nothing but suffering down that road. So, yeah.
I'll say to answer how I believe the question is being asked. It depends. Like for me, I run, as I've said before, a lot of pre-written stuff, and so for me, it's tending to just kind of look at, what in this adventure is kind of like the roads from here. And usually the adventures I like to run have multiple roads they can go. And so I try to look at like the 3 main things that might happen in the game. And one of the things that I found though is that even for pre-written adventures, try not to over prep for them, and on top of that, don't necessarily try to stick to exactly what's being said. One of the best pieces of advice I've heard is when there's read aloud text in a book is to maybe not use it, and just kind of do your own summary version of it, because it allows for more flow. It allows more for your players just ask the right questions, and for you to answer the questions as you see fit, not necessarily as the book itself sees fit. On top of that, there's what I would recommend.
Advice.
Yeah, what I would recommend. There's a book I'm recommend though, called "The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master" by Mike Shea. He wrote this with a mindset for like D&D and fantasy adventures, but I think it's a good book and for like usually for like making your own campaigns. But it's basically a way to prep less and have more fun. And I highly recommend reading that book to kind of get a premise for how to run your games without over prepping. And basically it's just coming in without going too detailed into what it is. It's basically like coming up with like some like basic ideas of what may happen next session with your players, especially if you've got a strong start at the beginning, that your players are going to be like guided in a certain direction or encouraged to go a certain direction with whatever's happening in the world, backing your players to a corner of some sort because they needed to make a decision. And then knowing what kind of locations they're going to visit, what possible locations they're going to visit, get a general feel for what those locations are going to be, general feel for what those NPCs they're going to interact with are. Again, not detailing everything, but just kind of a good general idea of who, what, where, and why. Like 3 of each, essentially. Without like writing like full backstories for every single NPC.
Yeah, and don't stress out. I mean, I think the worst thing would be stressing out over having to know all those details and then, coming to the game a stressed out person. I think you've set yourself up for failure. That sounds like, although I haven't read that book, that sounds sort of like what that author is describing is make a more relaxed game master.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If a relaxed game master is a lazy one, then so be it. You're there to have fun too, and your players are gonna, they're gonna mirror what you bring to the table in a lot of ways. The other thing I would say is say out loud how it is you want your players to feel in that session. Like,
mm-hmm.
What do you want to evoke for this session? Is it a terrifying session you're going to run? Is it a joyous one, a victorious one, a tense one, a mysterious one? And then, because if you say that out loud, then you start to say like, well, if it's a mysterious one, then I guess there's going to need to be clues. It starts to lead you down what the ingredients will need to be for that particular night.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a link to the book in chat, just for those who want to see it.
Awesome.
Like I said, I've read through this a few times. I need to read through it again.
I got to check that out.
It's a good resource. Just kind of coming to your game with a different mindset and trying not to over prepare. And it works for pre-written campaigns too. It works a little bit differently, but does work for them too. All right. The other question, we only had 2 questions on the Reddit. Or I should say 2 people asked questions. One person asked quite a few questions, so that's perfect. First question was, do you have a good list of beasties beyond the few in the core book to help with a variety of foes? Personally, I don't.
I say
personally, what I tend to do is I don't I use the one in the core rulebook. I also tend to use the ones from the Fantasy Companion and all the other books I have. So that's one of the things that's like, for helpful for me is I just try to is a monster exists, try to find the monster. Sorry, if I'm trying to use a certain monster, I'll try to find that monster in the book. If I cannot find that monster, I am just going to reskin an existing stat block.
Yep.
I don't like spending time on the only time I ever spend time on stat blocks is when I'm working with not beasties but NPCs
Yep.
that are gonna be like more like named NPCs and stuff.
Yep.
But other than that, I just reskin stat blocks. I find they're close to what I'm looking for. I don't like spending time writing stat blocks.
Nope, neither do I. It's not fun, and it's not needed to have fun either. It doesn't make things better. I either just make it up whole cloth,
Yeah.
or savage.us, go to the bestiary there, start typing things in to get some sort of framework stat block. Like, if I look up a human pirate in their bestiary and it has sort of some framework, and then I take that and say, yeah, but I don't like it having this vigor, so I'm going to adjust that. And I don't like it having this edge, so I'm going to adjust that. And I just go from there. But I don't keep like some long backup list with me in case, I guess maybe what they're asking is in case they encounter these things and you're not ready for it. But
I don't think so.
that doesn't happen to me much, just because of the nature of the games I run.
Yeah, and I don't, that's not really the feel I get for it. It's just like what are like just some beasts that they really like. But honestly, I have never had a problem. The problem for me is I've never had a problem with the stats of a monster. It's just the way I describe it. It's the description I give it, and the way I picture my own head as well.
Huh. Okay.
What's it? It's I'm not usually concerned about the stat blocks. It's like you said, it's either making it up on the spot and just going, you know what? Okay, you know what? This monster probably has some sort of magic ability to do this. I'm gonna give it an activation roll of a D8. It's a wild card, so I'm just roll that to see if it works. It's and I try to be consistent. Like, so once I establish like, okay, it's got a D8 in this one skill, whatever the skill is, I'll write that down, jot down. But I'm not concerned. I'm not overly concerned about personally. I'm not overly concerned about an exact stat block for that particular monster, unless it's like something really cool that I'm like really looking forward to running. If I'm just doing like a random thing, and then even in those cases, what I'm going to do is like you said, I'm going to find a monster that's similar, and then use that as the framework to add more abilities from whatever I think it would look good to do.
Yeah, and the other thing I do is I just keep die levels in mind. I think I might have
Yeah.
mentioned this to you in a previous conversation. Is I just keep like, are they 4s? Are they 6s? Are they 8s? Are they 10s? If they're more than 10s, you should stop and you should plan what's going on, because it's probably something quite major. But it's okay, if I'm in a fully improvised situation, which I rarely ever am, and they run into this, is this thing a house cat? Or is this thing a dire wolf, and it's okay, well then if it's a house cat, it's D4s and everything, and if it's a dire wolf, it's D8s and everything.
Right.
And I don't slow down, especially if people are having fun and it's getting tense and cinematic. I don't slow things down to make sure I have the exact right edge, for that particular monster, being used. I just keep it going.
Yep. And part of that is going to come down to us. The more you know the rules, the more you're going to be able to improv monsters like that. When it comes to like edges and stuff, you're going to remember. You just know how frenzy works. You just always are like, there's so many certain edges. You just like, I know how this edge works. I'm gonna give it to the character. I don't need to go look it up to figure out how that edge works. So part of that's just me knowing the system, knowing the game. But I think a lot of it is just deciding like, this monster's got D8 and everything. This monster's got D10 and everything. Or trying to adjust things based on how the game's going. Next question was, we talked about scaling adventures for like heroic and legendary, but this question is more about scaling between party sizes. So how would you handle scaling an adventure, say between a party of 4 and a party of 6?
I write that into my adventures. I do put in sort of what I would call a desired number of players, which is the number of pre-gens that I supply for the adventure. So that might be 5 or 6. Usually where I write those for. But let's say you pick up Shadows of the Sacred Hills and you're going to run it for 3 people. Well, in the writing, it will say things like, in this encounter, there are 1 X opponent per PC in the adventure, and so that's how I scale that. So if there's 3 characters playing, there's going to be 3 of these outlaws that they have to tussle with, and if there's 6 players, there's going to be 6. And I'll usually tie things into being related to the number of players that are at the table. So that's one way to scale it.
Yeah, so what I'm pulling up here is there's a section in the core rule book about running and creating like balanced encounters and stuff. I'm trying to figure out where that was, because there was a section about like, I know this because I read it today. Where was that? I'm not finding it right now, but I know there's a section in one of the books. I'm pretty sure it's in the core rule book about you creating monsters and designing threats. I think that's what the idea was. That's the section here. And it's basically, the monster supposed to be stronger. It basically takes in mind, like, is the monster supposed to be stronger? Is it supposed to be weaker? Is it supposed to no, it's not design threats. Is it supposed to be stronger? It's supposed to be weaker? Is it? And then how many? Basically, it's like a table for how many monsters you should have. And I can't find it right now, but I know I read it today, where it's like a table of like, how hard is the monster supposed to be, or the amount of monsters supposed to be, and how many monsters should there be.
Like, that was extra. In the core rule?
I thought so, but I'm not finding it.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
I know.
It very well may be. No, that would be hard for me because that seems very rigid. Not just from what you described there. And in a lot of ways, I think rigidity is sort of the foe of Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is very agile as a rule set. That's sort of the attractive thing about it.
Yeah, it wasn't like super strict. It was just kind of like, because honestly, a lot of your interpretation of the numbers comes down to your interpretation of your players' characters and the monster characters. And I'm really struggling to figure out where this was, because I know I read it today. I can't remember if it was like enemies encounters. I think it's in the Pathfinder for Savage Worlds book. Here we go. Like, if the enemy is weaker, the party faces a wild card leader plus 3 or 4 extras per hero. And then this is all under the assumption, like, we're assuming that the wild card enemy is worth about 3 extras of the same type. And we're also assuming that they are, the power level of the power level of these wild cards is a lot weaker than the players. So basically, if you have these characters that your opponents, your PCs are fighting, and you want that combat to be engaging and hard, but the enemy is a lot weaker, then do this. If the enemy is a lot stronger, it says, like, if you're having like extras and wildcards are a lot stronger than the party, then it says, do 3 to 5 extras or 1 or 2 powerful wildcards. And this is like guidelines and trying to help people. I don't it's very determined by your own reading of the situation. So I think it's in the end, I'm not super worried about balance. So I'm not sure how I got into this. And I apologize if I got one for a wild card there.
Yeah. I guess there's a number of ways you can do it. My personal preference is to be more fluid and make the judgment. I also don't feel that things need to be balanced. For example, if you have 3 adventurers, life is harder for 3 adventurers than it is for 6 traveling together. Like, that's just the way it is. And I'm not saying that it has to be a simulation of the real world, but that's very kind of basic, is like a bigger group of talented people is better off than a smaller group of talented people.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of just give like my overall thoughts on that is it usually if I'm just worried about trying to make sure it's not for balance but for like fun and like engaging encounter, I'm probably gonna increase the amount of extras, or size the amount of extras based on the amount of players. Um, so if I have 6 players, I probably want there to be more extras so that assuming at a certain point that there's going to be like a player may kill like 3 of them in one turn. Well, I want to make sure there's some other extras for the other players to kill too, or incapacitate in some way.
Yeah, another thing I do with encounters is I don't introduce all the NPCs at one time either.
Yeah,
I frequently have things happen where in the third round of combat this happens, or whatever. And what that does is not only does it make it interesting because something changes, it also prevents what you're describing, which is, oh, round 1 everybody got killed and wiped out. Well, these guys didn't because they weren't even on the scene yet, and things like that.
Yeah. So the last question that was on this Reddit post was, how do you tell if your encounters are good or too much for a party, depending on their quote level advancement? So it's kind of similar question here to that, to what we were talking about before, where it's like, how do you, and people will say in Savage like you can't. We kind of talked about this last week too. And that there's an element in which you'd say you can't really balance the encounter. The encounters are going to be wild, swingy. It may sometimes it depends on who pulls the ace first.
Mm-hmm. But was this about advancement? Was the question about it?
It was how do you tell if your encounters are good or too much for the party, depending. So the last question was about, how do you balance your encounter for party size? This one's how do you balance your encounter depending on what rank they are, essentially.
Oh, I understand. I thought it meant like, was it worthy of receiving an advance or an advance?
Oh, no. Just based on but I think that's also a question you could ask as well, is this worthy of advance? This is a side question, because I have thoughts. How do you remember the Savage Worlds Explorers Edition's XP rules?
Barely.
Okay. Essentially, it was.
I have it somewhere.
Yeah, essentially what it was is like you at the end of the session, you awarded 1 to 3 experience points based on how much you felt like the players accomplished that session. So that was a driving motivator for them to kind of move things along and try to play through the game and not just kind of dilly-dally with things that didn't matter. I really like that you brought up advancement. So I actually, there was something about that that experience system that I really liked. And I sometimes want to reintroduce back into my games. I
like that it's motivational.
Right, exactly. It gave some motivation to players to kind of like want to move on.
There's an incentive, to keep going.
Yeah, because that's actually I've been listening to a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts too because I drive an hour to work, and an hour back every day.
Wow.
And so one of the podcast I listened today was from Matthew Colville, and he was talking about helping players engage. And one thing that he mentioned is that in old D&D, the way that players were awarded with experience points was by how much gold they collected. Like for every gold you collected, that was 1 experience point. So you got 1,000 gold, that's 1,000 experience points. That's how you leveled up. That's how you were incentivized. That's why and then today people don't tend to care about gold. Like gold doesn't incentivize players a whole lot. But it did back then because it gave them experience. But I do think there's an element of reward that sometimes some Savage Worlds games do miss out on, other than just like having a good time, which is a good reward in itself. But sometimes there's some sort of reward to kind of to stay engaged, essentially. And I think that the old experience system, where you got 1 to 3 experience at every session, which was nice, it was consistent. And it was like at 5 experience points, you advanced. So advancement could be pretty quick if you stayed on your toes. I think average was like 2.5 sessions per advance, essentially, in that scenario, which may be too much for some people. But
That's probably where I'm at. Probably like an advancement every 2 to 3 sessions if things are moving at average, and
Yeah.
then at any significant resolution, there'd probably be an advancement as well.
Yeah, and I think sometimes advancements can move a little bit slowly in some published adventures. For instance, the Rise of the Rune Lords campaign. We just finished we're about to finish the book 1, and they've only had 3 advances. Now they are trying to space those advances out through the 6 books, but yeah, it really depends on what you're running and what you're playing. But I think that there is sometimes maybe a need for more advancement. And I think that the reward system there is interesting. If you want me to hear you talk about experience from Savage Worlds Adventure Edition or Savage Worlds Deluxe Edition, let me know. I'm thinking about doing a video about that. All right, so that's the last question from Reddit. We do have some more questions in the chat. Peter, I don't know how long you want to go. If you want to call it at some point, so just let me know.
I'm going. Let's do it.
Okay. Josh Hughes asks, "Do you find level of prep and gameplay styles differ? Sorry. Do you find level of prep and gameplay styles different between online versus in person? Which do you prefer?"
I prefer in person. That's the easy part of the question. Although online is fantastic and has brought this gaming industry to a whole new place. One of the silver linings of the pandemic, in my opinion. If there can be one. But I would say it depends how you're running online. If you're running a very immersive VTT with all the bells and whistles and the automated everything and all that, that's a lot of prep.
It's so much prep.
It's at some points I started to feel like I was just designing bad video games. That didn't feel good, because that's not, to me, that's not the spirit of the game I want to run. So I spent lots of times, learning Roll20 and this and that and the next thing. And I ran some really fun games on there, but eventually what I noticed was, as I started paring back the layers of added on things, I started getting a better, at least for myself, I think for my players as well, a better gaming experience. I just ran Shadows of the Sacred Hills 2 weeks ago online. Actually, Josh, who's asking this question, was in that game.
I didn't get to play it though. Oh, that Josh, not me, Josh.
No,
right.
Josh, who's asking the question, and you were going to be, but hey, life happens.
I had a kid,
and you had a good excuse, I guess. We'll give you a pass this time. And that one was just simply Discord video, nothing else, and we talked. Everybody rolled their own dice at their own desk or table or wherever they were. And it was, as similar to sitting around the table as you can really get. And I enjoy the heck out of that. I know everybody has different expectations for game styles and things like that. But for me, the prep is different. It's a lot more intense. And it's also out of my sort of skill set to do the online stuff. And although I prep a lot for in-game stuff, conventions and stuff, I make lots of materials and maps and this and that. I just feel more comfortable and natural with it. So it doesn't feel like a stressor to me. And, when I'm at the table and things, there were just weird things that would happen online. Like all of a sudden the turn counter disappeared, and it's like, that doesn't happen at the table because they're cards dealt in front of you. There was all these things that held up and delayed the game play on VTTs. And it was like, all those moments are moments where you lose the engagement, lose the tension, lose the cinematic flow of everything. So I strongly prefer in person. And if I play online, I really like to play. I like with video. I will say that. I think without video, for me, I get detached. They're just voices in my head, kind of at that point.
Almost here, listen to a podcast.
I think looking at people, even if it's not the greatest, highest quality camera or anything, I think it adds a lot to the game experience. Remember, these are games that are supposed to be like, they're games about people communicating with each other. Yeah, I mean, that's what TTRPGs are, is you're sitting there communicating with each other. So if you can look at other human beings, it's probably good for your brain.
Yeah, see, my weekly game usually is in person. We're gonna go back to person eventually. It's just right now it's on online, just due to having a new baby in the house.
Yep.
And so my prep, I've seen the main difference in my prep is that in my prep for online, one, I have purposely not used the more complicated VTTs like Roll20 or Foundry or Fantasy Grounds, because they just like you said, there's like too many layers there to deal with. So I'm actually using Albert Rodeo because all it is for me is the VTT, and then the I personally don't I like to use a online dice roller, um, mostly so that my players know that I because I like open dice usually when I roll.
Roll in front of the screen.
Yeah. I actually display my screen flat. I set my screen
Yep.
flat so I can have all the
Oh
resources
yeah,
on
you
my screen.
mentioned that. Yeah.
But I just roll them. Not that it's not like super visible, just because like I'm rolling up on like where I'm at and they can't necessarily see, but I'm not hiding them. So I just like the idea of like just quickly clicking a button and just rolls the thing I need. And what I just have is just like all the certain dice combinations kind of laid out there, and that's just set
And I don't
forever.
think that's a layer that's too complex.
Right, exactly.
Whatever works for you and doesn't detract from the core things you're trying to evoke with the game is all good. It's
Yeah,
just when it gets to be too cumbersome for me. I have limited abilities in this area. There's some people that are experts at this stuff and they really run fantastic online stuff.
mhm.
Just for my personal level of just amateurism, I've always run into just little stumbling blocks.
Yeah, I'd say for me, it's about the same for prep. The only thing different with online is that because I have like one widescreen and then two other screens.
Oh wow.
I just have like I'll just open up like three different PDFs at once. I'll have like the adventure PDF up. I'll have the core rulebook PDF pulled up with the another tab for the advanced players guide, and then I'll have like Albert Rodeo on one screen, and then I'll have a wound chart so I can quickly figure out, okay, I roll
Jeez.
damage.
You have
It's
a
more
whole
just
command center.
yeah, basically. So I just have like a bunch of reference stuff that I pull up, and that's all it is. It's not like setting up things that have to work during the game. It's just pulling up
Information.
resources so that I
Yep.
can look at them quickly. The only issue I've had personally is the like you said, the turn counter going away suddenly. Other than that, we've had some pretty good. We've actually noticed. I got to this comment from my players is that with Albert Rodeo, because it's pretty much just for at least for Savage Worlds, it's just a virtual tabletop and nothing too complicated about it. You can make it more complicated, but we don't tend to. All we have on it is Fog of War, and we move our miniatures around. That's it. Um, it makes it so much simpler to run, and it's actually very similar to the way that my in-person games go because I use a program called Arkenforge to kind of cast the maps that we have onto a TV that we lay on the table, so that we can have like a very detailed map. But all I'm doing is putting it to the table so they can see it. That's it.
Very cool.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. As far as like, and then gameplay styles, I think for me at least, because I haven't played a whole lot differently. I think it just plays pretty much the same. Um, I haven't noticed anything too different. The main difference I will say is that we don't use adventure cards when we play online.
Oh,
Um, which I know a lot of people don't use adventure cards in general, and there's a part of me that wants to get rid of adventure cards, but my players really like adventure cards, so they want to have them when we play in person. Have you ever had any experience with adventure cards?
yeah. We played during my online COVID game that I played for 2.5 years. Um, we used adventure cards every week. At that time, we were using. Well, we used two things. We used Roll20 and we used Fantasy Grounds.
Okay.
But I believe we used adventure cards in both of them. And sometimes they really would mess things up. The adventure cards would just really unsettle, whatever was going on, or completely resolve whatever was going
Right,
on,
right.
in a sort of jarring way. But we used them. We had fun. We were a pretty laid back group. We were okay with that. Just, another session zero thing to discuss.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. We've changed things around a little bit with ours. Um, but yeah. All right. Well, that is all I have. It is getting pretty late, and partially because of the late start. And I apologize again for the late start, everybody. But as far as the live stream is concerned, we're running out into 2 hours. So,
Wow.
Peter, do you have any last comments that you want to say before we call it for the
Oh, I
night?
want to thank you very much for having me on again. I appreciate it. I look forward to more conversations like this. I love how many people we got asking questions. It's great. There was a ton of important questions there. I hope somehow we helped or shed some light on your problems. If we didn't, just keep asking us or get a hold of me. I see some comments in here. I see this Tyler fellow chiming in that he does theater of the mind with no VTT over video with voice. And so that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I do. Sounds like you're running a great game. Invite me to your game.
My players tend to have a hard time with theater of the mind, just picturing where everything is, because they tend to be very tactical and like where they like to be located and stuff. So
exactly. So that it comes right back to like question number 1 or 2 of tonight, which was set expectations.
Yep, exactly. All right. Thanks, Peter, for joining us. If you guys want to check out Peter's products, go to Drive Through RPG. The links are down below for Shadows of the Sacred Hills, which is a Weird West setting book and adventure, and then Iselion Hybrid, which is a sci-fi mystery horror type of adventure as well. So check those out. Links are down below. Next week, we are going to be talking to the people from Star Anvil about the Secret World. So look forward to next week's video as well. And with that, everybody have a good night. Cheers.
See ya.